Hi, the internet. My name is Ben. I've spent the last 16 years as an employee of the Catholic Church, including the last 3 as an assistant principal of a Catholic school, and Donald Trump made me an atheist. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to How Donald Trump Made Me an Atheist. This is part 2 of our journey in which I attempt to perform an autopsy on the rotting corpse that is my former faith. If you missed part 1, you will be laboring on further without crucial information about me, without which your lives will be woefully incomplete. So check the link in the description to get yourself caught up. So this is my 4th attempt at recording this video. I don't know what happened. I don't know why I threw out the first 3 attempts. I just didn't like something. I never rewrote it ever. I just emphasized the words differently, thought that might do the trick. This time I decided to wear a very loud necktie. So then I thought about moving the order of this video around, like pushing it back in the slate somewhere. But then I looked at my last video and I had really committed to covering this topic. And I also saw that it had almost 20 views. And I went, well, I can't do that. I'll confuse my tens of viewers. So the pillar we're covering today is something that is also internal and personal. And it's something that most Christians, and in fact most religious people, rarely discuss at all. And so my deep concern here is that this is something that is too personal. It's something that is really exclusive to me. I don't believe it is, but it is something that I wonder about. Is the reason so few people talk about it because it isn't a very common thought process? So I'm torn between thinking my story is so commonplace that it's relatable, but also that it's so mundane that it's uninteresting or unwatchable. But I don't know. The show Two Broke Girls managed to succeed for 6 seasons, and it's about 2 ordinary girls living 2 ordinary workaday lives, demonstrating ordinary everyday racism.
Max, you're 48 minutes late for work.
Look, little Debbie, I will drop kick your baby powdered ass back to the Shire with the other hobbits.
I'm not calling for that again.
Relax. She's just down the street at Deke's place. You know how it is when you first start sleeping with somebody and you can't keep your hands off each other. Yeah, just take my word for it.
That's it. I am marching over there and putting my foot down with Max. No one has sex on my clock.
Well, maybe your clock's not big enough.
Get it? Asian men are short, and their private bits are tiny. They couldn't even give a woman the Eucharist. Now, see, if you missed the first episode, you didn't get that joke. You're missing out. Go back and watch the first episode. That was a good joke. See, what I'm getting at is that Two Broke Girls castrates Asian men as a very funny joke. Okay, so let's get into the topic at hand. In the last video, I mentioned that today's topic is a little nugget I discovered in writing what is now episode 3. There was something else other than just personal experiences in church and personal experiences in the Eucharist that really grounded my faith before I decided to take that rational step of finding a scientific or rational grounding for it. I don't think it was ever rationally grounded now, but I gave it a go for a bit. I sustained my faith life, I think, on some level because it made me feel special. It made me feel exceptional. Being the most pious, the most practiced, the most perfect Catholic I could be made me feel in some ways better than other people, but at least unique. It was my identity. Right? Why would I take a deep critical look at my faith when it was part of who I was? And to be clear, I didn't consciously know that's what was going on. I didn't ever think my Catholicism, my faith makes me better than others. But when I look at my attitudes and actions throughout middle school, high school, and college and beyond, I see those fingerprints everywhere. And that's something that moderately concerns me now, right? Did I just decide that atheists were the smarty pants cool club of intellectuals? And I don't think so, because I have more checks in place to critique my own thinking. But I don't know. That's the thing about bias, right? You don't know where it is. You can only really hope to keep looking for it. So anyway, that sense of superiority, that sense of specialness manifested in a bunch of different ways, but it was most specific towards my attitudes on sex, drugs, and alcohol. So middle school is that time in your life when you first start self-actualizing your own identity. You start to become aware that other people's perceptions of you are in some ways under your control. You get to pick how other people see you, at least a bit. And for me, what made me special, what made me unique, what made me stand out was how fervently I believed. Now, my family and my church community didn't apply the same type of full court press that I hear from other Christians with respect to sex, drugs, and alcohol, but I definitely did hear about how my Christianity should affect my behavior with respect to those things. Right? And I want to focus in on premarital sex because saving yourself for marriage was pitched to me as something that was extremely rare, extremely challenging, extremely difficult, but also extremely rewarding. Waiting for marriage was like making it to the Hall of Fame of believers, right? It wasn't like a special place in heaven, but in the same sense that a Hall of Fame in sports represents those people who were the very cream of the crop. You just stand in awe of what they were able to accomplish. That was how I thought people would think of me, and I wanted that. And it was also sort of insinuated that one's sex life would be great. I remember when my family went on a retreat one time together. It was something we did every year, and my dad and I got to talking. It was one of those great father-son moments, and we talked about lots of different life issues. I still look back on it as a great father-son moment. And we got to talking about waiting for marriage, and I remember him saying something like this. I don't know how to explain why it's so important, but I know that I did, and I'm really happy that I did. I know that my father did, and that he was happy that he did, and I want the same thing for you. That was really compelling for me for a lot of reasons, not the least of which was that my family, my extended family, is an exceptional group of human beings. That's just true. That's not just saying, oh, I love my family. If you look at their resumes, it's eye-popping, right? And so I wanted to be a part of that club of exceptional, accomplished human beings who were also disproportionately faithful. So I tied those two things together in my head. And so I said, okay, waiting for marriage, having a deep enough sense of faith to wait for marriage is part of that exceptional journey. I want to stress, my dad wasn't being manipulative here. It was a great father-son moment, even now, even as I look back on it now. So in this one case, in this one conversation, it was premarital sex, but I had similar attitudes towards drugs and alcohol as well. Those were things that people who didn't have a special relationship with God fell into. I could still associate with people who engaged in any of those activities, but they weren't going to be my close friends. I kind of kept them at arm's length. There's that passage in 1 John where Christians derive the concept of being in the world but not of the world. That was something that resonated with me. I wanted the adults in my life to respect me. I wanted my peers to admire me for what I was able to accomplish in such a wicked world. Yeah, I went to a Catholic middle school and a Catholic high school and had convinced myself that I was the captain of a rickety boat navigating my way through the unstoppable waves of some sinful storm. I used to write songs and poetry. They were always either explicitly or implicitly about my faith. And then I would always share those with friends of mine who I knew would find those things incredibly deep. And that sounds really cringy because it was. But I wasn't being phony, right? I believed the things that I wrote. I just needed to make sure other people also knew how much I believed the things I believed. And this is where I want to be careful because I wasn't braggadocious about my faith, and I wasn't that kid who is such a fervent believer, is so on fire for Christ, that everyone either thinks they're lying about it or they're making fun of them for it behind their back. That wasn't the case. My teachers and my peers both did have a high opinion of me. I do know that to be true. I mean, I've worked in a high school and I've worked in a middle school. I know the kids who can't find that middle ground, and that wasn't me. I was finding that middle way where people knew me, respected me, understood me, but didn't quite have the same level of faith that I did. But there's also no doubt that my faith in God and in Catholicism drew me to a different lifestyle than my peers that also caused me to feel self-important. And there's also a positive feedback effect here that I think is really important to get into here because it caused me to fall into a logical fallacy. Feeling that my faith made me exceptionally capable of avoiding the temptations of sex, drugs, and alcohol actually provided me some level of inoculation against those exact temptations. I only surrounded myself in my close friend group with people who agreed that sex, drugs, and alcohol were things to be avoided. So I had less access to all of those things. And then I'd see acquaintances of mine who weren't in my faithful sphere, and they'd fall into some of these habits, and I'd go, see, Johnny's not a good Catholic boy like me, and now he's doing a marijuana. So I had developed this circle of friends who were all committed to the idea of abstaining from sex, drugs, and alcohol, and who also all had a belief that through intervention from God, we would succeed in doing so. But that's a self-selected group. We took a group of people who were committed to avoid a particular set of behaviors. Then we succeeded in avoiding those behaviors, but attributed the success to intervention from God. But even that's not quite true, is it? Because out of this self-selected group of people who wanted to abstain from those behaviors, should we have ever found ourselves engaged in one of those behaviors, we wouldn't have reported it back to the group, right? If one of my friends ended up going to a party that had alcohol and ended up doing a couple shots and everything was fine, they probably weren't going to come back to the group and say, hey, I ended up drinking this weekend. It's no big deal. So I took in all this information as data and said, all of my friends who are faithful are avoiding sex, drugs, and alcohol. It must be supernatural intervention that's guiding us forward. But I hadn't eliminated the possibility that believing that God didn't want us to do it was a good enough motivator. The belief was a good enough motivator. So let's give an example, right? I think about 100% of the population, but not quite, would agree with the following statement. God does not want people to blow up buildings with innocent civilians inside of the buildings. Like just about everyone would say that's true. But we also know that people do blow up buildings with innocent civilians inside of those buildings explicitly because they believe God wants them to do it. Do we think God gave them the strength to perform that action? No, I don't think so. I didn't think so when I was a believer. And believers of that exact same faith tradition would also say that God didn't give them the strength to do it. Right? It's really easy to imagine that a terrorist may have had a moment of doubt the night before a terrorist act was supposed to happen. Right? So suicide bombing. It's easy to imagine they might have gone, shit, I don't want to blow myself up. Maybe this isn't right. And they end up praying. And they pray to God for the strength to carry out what they believe is God's will. Can we not imagine that in that moment they were able to steel themselves with the resolve to actually go ahead and blow up a building? I can imagine that happening. But I would never give God the credit for giving that person that courage. It wasn't God that gave them the strength. It was the belief that God wanted them to do it that gave them that resolve. And yet we know there are millions of believers around the world who credit God for their ability to give up alcohol, drugs, pornography, homosexuality, giving up homosexuality. We know that they think that's what caused them to quit the habit. But couldn't it have just been the belief? My peer group's belief that God didn't want us to have sex or drink or do drugs was what motivated us to not have sex or do drugs or to drink. That's what did it. The belief motivated the behavior, but I attributed our success to God. There was another factor involved keeping me from engaging in sex, drugs, and alcohol. Look at this picture. Look at this child. This is my freshman year of high school. No one was giving this child drugs or alcohol. This child was not getting laid. Yeah, if I really think about it, anyone who gave that kid, there's the photo, anyone who gave that kid drugs, I mean, that's tough. You're at the bottom of the barrel. I just don't know that a lot of drug dealers in high school with that entire customer pool is going to go, that kid, we need to hook that 9-year-old. And like I would flirt with girls and develop these relationships and things would be going smoothly, and then I couldn't seem to there was something I couldn't get past, and I didn't know what it was, but it's clear to me now why they didn't see me as a sexual being. The belief motivated the behavior, but I attributed our success to God, and it actually provided further evidence in my mind that God loved us, that God wanted us to succeed in this incredibly difficult endeavor. That unfounded attribution is something that crops out of an issue with logical frameworks as they relate to models of reality, a sentence that is both true and extremely boring sounding. So let me explain. If A, then B is a fill-in-the-blank version of a logical premise. If we find any two propositions A and B where B is a natural outcome of A, we can say the statement, if A, then B. If we can then demonstrate that proposition A is in fact the case, we are logically and rationally bound to accept that B is also the case. You can't accept if A then B, then discover that A is true, and then not affirm that B is also true. That would be an irrational conclusion. So let's suppose we're having a conversation and I say, let proposition A be, Peyton is my sister, and proposition B is, Peyton is my sibling. I could construct the logical premise, if A, then B. If Peyton is my sister, then Peyton is my sibling. If you have any familiarity with the English language, you would affirm that that statement is true. If Peyton is my sister, then Peyton is my sibling. If I can then demonstrate that Peyton is in fact my sister, we would all be logically constrained to accept that Peyton is also my sibling. This is deductive logic, and we use it all the time. That might seem obvious because of our familiarity with the terms sister and sibling, but it could apply to any two propositions. If we can connect them in an if A then B relationship, and then demonstrate A is true, we have to accept B is true. And this also works in a sort of backwards way. If I can prove that B is not true, I actually also demonstrate that A is not true. And let's apply that to our situation with Peyton. If I could demonstrate that Peyton is in fact not my sibling, that's proposition not B, then we'd also have to accept that Peyton is not my sister. So we can say, if A then B, A, therefore B. We can say, if A then B, not B, therefore not A. However, we can't draw conclusions from the other two possibilities. This is all basic logic, and if I'm rehashing something with which you are already really familiar, I'm sorry, but I'm building to something. The two logical steps we can't take in this scenario are the following. If A, then B, B, therefore A. That could be true, but it isn't necessarily true. So, if Peyton is my sister, then Peyton is my sibling, and then I demonstrate to you that Peyton is in fact my sibling, you can't say with certainty that therefore Peyton is my sister. Peyton may in fact be my sister, but sister implies a sibling who identifies as a female, and we have made no claim so far about whether or not Peyton is in fact female. Peyton could be a male person or Peyton could be non-binary. So we can't conclude that A is true because we find that B is true. Similarly, if we demonstrate that A is false, we can't make a claim about whether B is false. If we can demonstrate that Peyton is in fact not my sister, we can't say anything with certainty about whether Peyton is not my sibling. So let's talk about the logical fallacy in which I was engaged in high school and beyond. Going into middle school and into high school, I accepted as true the following proposition. If God provides me with supernatural assistance, I will be able to avoid sex, drugs, and alcohol. Whether or not you agree with that statement at all is irrelevant because I believed it to be the case. And then I went through middle school and high school and college, and I knew on a personal level that I did not in fact engage in sex or drugs or alcohol. So I made a claim, if A, then B, then I had personal verification that B was the case. And I went back and concluded that A was true. God must have provided me with supernatural assistance. And that is a logical fallacy. I know that's not how it works. I'm a generally rational person. How did I fall for this trap? And the answer is that while deductive reasoning is sound, it's used in everyday life less frequently than inductive reasoning, which is something we're going to have to cover in a future video. I know it feels like I'm doing that thing from How I Met Your Mother where I just keep pushing things down the road, but unlike the creators of How I Met Your Mother, I actually have all my episodes planned out. That show really jumped a shark in the middle there. I don't know if you watched it. It was terrible. Not Two Broke Girls bad, but bad. We're still building up the faith that I believed in so that we can see how Donald Trump was able to knock it all down. I'm so excited to get to the other end of this. I think it's really fun. But for now, to recap, was this. My faith made me feel special because I knew people didn't believe as fervently I did. And then my faith made me feel like God was real because I thought God's assistance made me capable of acting exceptionally. So for two reasons, my belief in God made me feel special. And no one whose ego was as dependent on their belief in God had a chance of really deeply evaluating its truthfulness. All right, next time we're going to be doing some of the higher order explanations for the existence of God. I had a good skeleton in place, but I needed more tendons and sinew and all that stuff. I hope you enjoyed this episode of How Donald Trump Made Me an Atheist. If you did, please like and subscribe. It actually goes a long way for the channel's success. If you find it incredibly interesting, please visit patreon.com/BigBennyBuckets. Those contributions do wonders for someone like myself. A big thank you to Brendan, my first patron. And of course, if you comment on the video, I will do my best to respond to all of those. I will see you all next time. Actually, I won't. I look at a camera. You see me next time. Goodbye.